Hello my friends, Kaitlyn here, and oh my gosh, the Vampire Diaries is over. So if you've been following me for a while now, you know that I'm a bit of a Vampire Diaries fan. I binge watched the first 3 seasons on Netflix the summer of 2012 after I had graduated college and I didn't have a job yet, and I was kind of having a bit of an existential crisis. But TVD was there for me in my darkest times. Okay, but no, really, somehow I started watching the show in a very tumultuous time in my life, and then I fell in love with it and stuck with it over the years through all of the crazy deaths and Elena being a really whiny jerk sometimes, and Nina Dobrov leaving the show, and some questionable storylines and plot holes. So the fact that it's over makes me really kind of sad. To celebrate and mourn the ending, I thought I would make a video giving my reactions on how it ended. FYI, this has spoilers. So many spoilers. So do not watch this and then complain to me in the comments that I spoiled it for you, because you have been fairly warned. Okay, so where can we even start? So I considered live watching the show and giving my reactions, but I thought, I'm probably gonna cry a lot, so this isn't a good idea. And I watched it last night, and oh my gosh, did I cry so much. And I actually had to stop the show at one point and go and blow my nose and then come back because I couldn't breathe anymore. Okay, so as a whole, how would I rate it? At first, I was like, this is a wonderful ending to the show. But even just a couple hours later, the more I thought about it, and even I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, actually, I'm kind of disappointed in a lot of things. Did it feel rushed? Absolutely. I think my biggest problem, not just with this finale, but really with this season as a whole, was that season 8 was just not very good. People have been complaining in comments throughout the season, being like, this is a terrible season. And I've been like, it's not really that bad. But looking at the whole 16 episodes, which is a shorter season than it's normally, I am kind of like, oh, this was bad. The beginning with the sirens, which got old real quick, I'm like, that part was better than the last bit. I'm actually a really big fan of season 7 without Elena, and a lot of people quit the show afterward. They're like, I'm not watching anymore, it's not TVD without Elena, blah 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 blah. But I really enjoyed it because it got back to the story between the two brothers, and I felt like, the love triangle and really just sort of Elena's story had been played out. So yeah, there was a lot about the season that felt like, how can we get through what we'd set up at the end of the 7th season and then get to the point where we can bring Elena back and tie the whole thing up really quick. So now, the concept that Catherine, who is really in many ways their greatest enemy, she's kind of the one that started this whole thing, so the fact that they're having to have this big showdown with her at the very end and she's somehow taken over hell is really compelling, I think, for the story as a whole. But it's actually done in really one episode, because Nina Dobrov is only going to be in that one episode, and they kind of teased her in the episode before that, but she wasn't in that one. And it felt like, for someone who was supposed to be, quote, the baddest bitch of all, and it took forever for her to die in the first place, and we'd sort of laid Catherine to rest in a way, and it's like, oh, she's gonna come back and get her revenge. It felt sort of like a weak revenge, really. We've had such intense villains that have been so hard to kill. So basically, in one 50-minute episode, they find out Catherine's plan in the first, say, 5 to 10 minutes, and then in the next, say, 10 to 15 minutes, they figure out how to destroy everything, and then 10 minutes after that is all right, they put the plan into action. That's something that usually goes over at least a whole half a season, and they did it in one episode. So the epicness of it was not as epic, especially for an episode titled I Was Feeling Epic. But things that I was happy with or made a good impression on me are, one, that Bonnie didn't die, that Bonnie did not have to martyr herself for this, because oh my gosh, I would have been so angry if she had. She has just continually sacrificed herself for other characters, and she's such a good character. And this is not how she should go out. So I really love the scene where she was holding back all the hellfire, and all the Bennett witches from generations past, came behind her and were with her, and her using her magical witchy woo power to push it back and, save Mystic Falls. However, it is not really explained why suddenly she has magic again. It's just kind of this idea that the magic has been in her all along. But that's... what? Really? I mean, there were so many instances where, I mean, Enzo being controlled by like an evil demon spawn siren thing, like that wasn't good enough incentive to use her magic. Huh? So yeah, I felt like that was also another plot point that could have taken several episodes of her like figuring out, hey, I am a like badass witch here. I can do whatever I want. But instead it really happened in one episode again. And so this brings us to Stefan's death, which is what I had seen in comments everywhere for the last few weeks of like, Stefan's gonna die. And while I agreed with them, I was like, yeah, I feel like that's probably what's gonna happen. I was like, it seems so predictable. Surely they won't be that predictable. So when Damon steps up and is like, I need to do this, I need to get rid of Kaitlyn, like, and compels Stefan to walk away, and Stefan walks away, I'm like, oh, wow. This Damon's actually going to be the one, which is despite the fact that I love, like, Damon's one of my favorite characters. I've loved Delena despite my kind of dislike for Elena in the last few seasons that she was in, and I really wanted them to be endgame. I felt like it would be kind of poetic in many ways if Damon was the one to sacrifice himself, because he's always been the bad boy. So for him to really redeem himself in a way by sacrificing himself for his love and his brother and everyone in Mystic Falls, a place that he seemed to hate when the series started, I felt like it was going to be really great. But then it ended up being Stefan, and like everything that happened, like where he comes in and gives Damon the cure and like takes Kaitlyn into the Hellfire, and then, it kind of meets Elena in the mystical in-between world, and then comes out and sees Lexi, which is really beautiful. I loved all of that. It was a wonderful send-off to Stefan, and I was glad that he was able to have that. But I do feel like maybe it was a little disingenuous to his character as a whole, because I feel like the reason he did that was because he felt so guilty for what he did to Enzo. That's kind of been a driving force the last few episodes since he's been human, and I don't know how much I agree for that in his character as a whole over 8 seasons. But it really does make the series as a whole kind of make sense as to why it's ending, because it really started with Stefan. Things that were underwhelming, the Delena reunion, their kind of attraction and the chemistry that they had on screen was amazing from the start of the series, and it was bad in this episode. There's all kinds of rumors about Ian Somerhalder and Nina Dobrev and Ian's wife, Nikki Reed, and you don't want to believe any of those things, but though I don't know if it's the way that it was written, the fact that it was, condensed down into a little bit of time, or if there really is kind of this weirdness between those two actors, but that kind of spark and fire was not there, which was kind of disappointing for the end of a series. Also, I know that there are a lot of people who are very anti-Caroline and Stefan, and I'm not one of those people. I really, since they sort of became friends, I've always been a shipper of their friendship, and then when it seemed like it was going to become a thing later, I was a big fan of that, just because I felt like it was one of the most natural relationships on the shows, that really you saw the growth from the very beginning and how it matured, and then you see them getting married, and that was really beautiful. It was very sad to see like Stefan die. Like, they've been married for a day, probably not even no, they weren't even married that long. They were married a couple hours. Oh my gosh. Caroline didn't have a lot to do in this particular episode, which is kind of sad for me, because she actually became my favorite character in the series. I hated her when the series started because she was that stereotypical mean girl, but she really is what I think defines the Vampire Diaries, and that she became a vampire and found that she was a better person by being one, and it was sort of the redeeming factor, I think, for vampires in the show as a whole. But I was glad that the one scene that really got me started crying was when she realized what Stefan was gonna do, and then she calls him and leaves him a message and says that she understands, because that's not actually a normal Caroline thing to do. If you've seen, she's always the fighter and being like, no, you can't do this, this is selfish, or don't do this to me. It was kind of a really selfless act for her to leave that message and say, I love you no matter what, and I understand. And it's gonna make me cry right now. I felt like that was maybe the like Bonnie and the Bennett witches, and then like Caroline leaving that message, I think were my favorite parts of this episode. Okay, so now that I've like started to make myself cry, which is really silly, I'm like, it's a TV show, Kaitlyn, don't cry. So my last question for myself is, did I feel like it did the series justice? And it's a real, I think you can tell from what I've talked about before, that it's a real yes and no. I don't think it was like a horrible ending. It definitely tied up some loose ends. I loved how it started the season with this idea of like hell, and then ended it with hell being destroyed, and then everyone being able to go to peace, and you seeing a lot of these old characters, which I think was beautiful. And it did tie it up in such a way where you don't feel like you need any more episodes. It's like, all right, it's over now. I almost feel like I need to go back and rewatch some of the earlier seasons to see if I feel like it actually does it justice. And I think the conclusion I may come to is no. But really, when a show goes this long, gosh, does the ending ever really do it justice? I think that writers who write TV shows and have like, this is how many seasons we have in mind, like this is the main story and we're gonna end it there, and don't get caught up in the like, well, this is successful, so let's keep going for years and years, and then you kind of like write yourself into these holes. And I do wonder if that's what happened to the Vampire Diaries, because it was beautiful and there was a big fan following, and I wouldn't have wanted it to end 3-4 seasons ago, but it does leave you with a little bit of an ache when it finally ends, and you wonder, is it as, clean and pure as it was when it started? So the final thing is, I want to know what you guys think about the ending of TVD. If you have gotten this far in the video, you've either really spoiled the ending for yourself, or you are like me and have been simultaneously mourning it and celebrating this wonderfulness of getting to experience this fun show. So down in the comments, make sure you tell me all your thoughts about the ending. Oh, and should I watch the originals? Because I love vampires and magic and all that fun stuff. Is it worth going into the, 3 seasons they have now? 4th season is starting in a few weeks. Okay, so also remember to like, favorite, share, and subscribe if this video made you smile. See you guys on Thursday.